Hello. In this video, we're going to talk about finding your voice and standing up for what's right, even when it's hard. Have you ever felt like speaking up, but fear held you back? Do you remember any time that maybe you heard a coworker hesitating to report mistreatment, or a person in a relationship was holding back tears? Or you seeing a bystander watching injustice unfold yet would not do anything about it? Fear whispers, stay quiet, don't make waves. It's safer this way. I can remember a lot of instances where this has happened to me. I remember when I was growing up, even in the classroom, I was shy. And when a teacher would ask a question and I had the answer and I wanted to raise my hand, before I can even raise my hand, I could feel my face getting really red. And instead of raising my hand, because I'm so intimidated by speaking up and being, voicing out my answer and people looking at me and judging me, I elected to stay quiet. And I grew up like that until, as I mature, I found my voice. I found my confidence. Back then, I was intimidated by a lot of things, being judged, being fearful that my answer was wrong, that I would not pronounce things right, that I would not be able to express what I had in my mind. Um, all those things held me back. But over time, as I've said in my other videos, I found my voice, I found my confidence. So that has changed over the years, but it didn't take a day, a month, or a year. It took several years to get there. And I am glad that it did, because I would rather speak up than be silent. I would rather have my voice out there and be judged rather than keeping what I had to fight for to myself. There are instances where um, I can relate to that. When I was working in California, I used to work for a hospital, and I've done inpatient dialysis for a long time. Inpatient dialysis is where you do dialysis in the hospital for sick people. So you only did the dialysis for people that were admitted, while chronic dialysis is when you go to a clinic where people that are not sick get their dialysis like 3 or 4 times a week to survive. So that is the difference between chronic dialysis and inpatient dialysis. And I had done inpatient dialysis for a long time. I prefer inpatient dialysis because you have more time to deal with the patient. You have like a one-on-one. You're able to establish rapport, and you're able to monitor the patient because you have less patients, and that is because they're sick patients. We used to do patients in the ICU all the time. We did patients after open heart. These are patients with other comorbidities like diabetes, like sepsis, when everything's going wrong, and we're trying to do dialysis because the kidneys have shut down and other organs have shut down. So in this hospital, we were inpatient dialysis nurses for a long time. And all over California, we see hospitals where they have inpatient dialysis nurses, and also other hospitals where they have contracted dialysis nurses, where nurses work for DaVita or Fresenius, and they come and service the hospital. So the hospital has a contract with this big dialysis companies for their inpatients. And back then, we had a new manager who came in, and he does not have a lot of dialysis experience, but with new managers, sometimes they come in and they try to mark their territory. So there were a lot of changes, and um, he was very controlling, and he was micromanaging, and over time he would kind of threaten the staff that, if we don't ramp up our productivity or we don't improve our productivity, they will ask Davida or Fresenius or contract people to come in and replace us. Um, and this was wrong. We have serviced this hospital for a long time, about 10 years. And there is a difference between being an inpatient staff versus an outpatient or contract staff that come in to service the hospital. First, the care is better. There's continuity of care. You know the people that you work with from different floors to the ICUs. You know the nurses that you work with, and they trust you. You do your best because you're a part of the hospital and you want the best for the patients. So when you're a representative of the hospital, you abide by the rules because you are part of that hospital and you need to represent the hospital as a staff, compared to when you're contracted out. Your employer is not the hospital itself, but the chronic dialysis centers that service those hospitals. So basically, these companies are very busy, and sometimes they service 3 or 4 hospitals. So the nurses would go into that hospital and do the dialysis for the number of staff that the number of patients that are waiting for the dialysis. And then another hospital would call and say, hey, we have an emergency, this patient needs to dialyze right now. And sometimes, because they don't have enough people to go around all those hospitals, they need to prioritize the cases. And dialysis usually takes at least 3 to 4 hours on the machine. It does not include the setup, which can be an hour to set up or an hour to break down, because you need to clean the machine. At the beginning, you need to prep the patient. At the end, you need to break down the machine, put away the machine because you're moving to another hospital. So when you are tied up in that hospital, you're not able to go to the hospital that's calling and say, okay, I'm coming. You need to finish what you're doing. So that is one problem when there is a contract. They try their best, of course. I'm not saying Davida or Fresenius are bad places, but because of the nature of the job, you're tied up and you're not able to go right away to another hospital. There is a delay in care. So we all know this as inpatients. I've worked for contract dialysis at the beginning when I first started dialysis. So I know both worlds. And when this manager was threatening us with replacing us, a lot of my coworkers feared that if they speak up, they will lose their jobs. So they preferred not to rock the boat. I, on the other hand, was not afraid to speak up. And in that instance, I had a lot to lose. I'm a single mom with 2 kids, no husband. And so if I lose my job, if they retaliated against me and I lose my job, I have nothing nothing to fall back on. I don't have a husband to work or support me. So at that time, there was so much pressure. And I saw the bosses use that to intimidate us and to kind of make us submit to what they want, even if it was wrong. It's just not, productivity. It's a lot of stuff. But with working in a hospital, you need to balance productivity and care for the patients. When care for the patients is sacrificed because you're just going with productivity, that is wrong. It is safety first, patient first. So when they were trying to get us to do more productivity, it sacrifices the patients because they're rushing, they're cutting down the time we're dialyzing the patients so we can process more patients and not accrue overtime. But you can't rush these things when you're dialyzing a patient. You can't rush these things. And there are times when something happens and you're there longer, right? Because when you're working in the hospital, when you go to ICU, you're just not presenting yourself and say, everybody get out, I'm here, I'm going to dialyze. No, you got to coordinate, especially if that person just finished coding or they just resuscitated the patient. Everybody's in the room trying to work together, so you got to wait for your turn. The dialysis machine is big and you cannot just go in there and push your machine. There are ventilators in the room, there are people working RT, lab people, nurses, doctors. So it's a coordination. And so there are times when delays are inevitable. And so you just have to work with that. But with I felt, and I know others did too, but they refused to speak up, that, what they were asking was not right, and what they were doing with threatening us and intimidating us and hanging that over our head, like, if you don't do this, then say goodbye. That was wrong. So I decided to speak up, and I had the most to lose. I was surprised that a lot of my coworkers did not, and they looked at me like, hey, just be quiet, don't rock the boat, because the more you rock the boat, the more they're going to come at us. But I believe differently. I believe that when something is wrong, you need to speak up and you need to push back and say, no, it is not right. Because if you stay quiet, the more they're going to push. They will push until they see that, you're not going to fight. They know. And so at that time, as I said, I had a lot to lose if I lose my job. But for me, there is no other way. I have to speak up, because if I don't speak up, then it's just going to continue doing. It's just going to continue. They're going to keep continuing what they're doing. So I wrote this letter to the chief nursing officer. We had a meeting, but I wrote this letter. I wasn't there, but I was in another state visiting my family. And even though I was not present, I sent that letter and what I had to say to my coworker, who I asked to read that letter. And it basically said, this is not wrong. This is wrong. This is against the hospital policy of threatening staff, intimidating staff, and that it has to stop. And maybe my coworkers did not think that helped, but I did, because to this day, that manager has moved on, and to this day, they're still there. And I have left California for more than 10 years, and I am not taking all the credit, but I think I did I did um, move that needle, um, and I moved it to our advantage. Um, but at that point, when I spoke up, I saw my friends look at me differently, like they they thought I was just a troublemaker because I didn't want to keep quiet. I didn't want to do what they're doing, which is just bow their heads and let the new manager run them over. Um, and that was okay with me. I would rather lose the friends, the coworkers, um, and remain fighting for what I believe in, that is right and that is true. Um, so that's a long story, but that speaks about, staying quiet, not making waves because it's safer. Safer does not does not mean that you're going to be okay, because the bullies will always take. The bullies will do it. You allow, over the years, you are treated the way you allow people to treat you. So if you allow them to push and to take, then they will. But if you say no, then they know their limits and they won't push. They know they cannot push you that way, but you have to speak up. And and I'm not saying it's easy. There are consequences to it. Like, for example, a battered woman who cannot stand up to the husband. Of course, when you're battered, your self-confidence is already shot. But sometimes their fear for their lives is the momentum that they need to just speak up and say no more. They, of course, they're fearing, oh, he's gonna retaliate, and I'm talking about the batterer. He can retaliate against the kids, the actual battered wife, or the battered wife's family, because some people do that. They would say, if you say something, I will kill you and your family or the kids. And of course, that is a big threat hanging over their head. But at one point, you got to choose whether you will keep being quiet and just take the abuse, or you speak up and end the abuse. We have a lot of people who have spoken up, who found their voice, despite the opposition, despite the fear of being retaliated upon. Martin Luther King is one. We celebrate him as a hero. He fought for us. He had a voice. Despite all the pushback and despite all the discrimination against Blacks, he fought. And now we celebrate him as a hero. History isn't made by those who stayed silent. It is made by those who found their voice even when their hands were shaking. A person finally saying no, a worker reporting an issue, a single person standing before a crowd. Speaking up alone is hard, but silence is prison. Courage isn't the absence of fear, it's acting despite it. It's not easy to speak up. We see that nowadays with what's going on in the government. I noticed I've been on social media for a while, a year, And I've seen the change ever since this new government has started. I've seen the change. I've been making videos. I have been making videos prior to Trump getting in office. I would ask AI to do some thumbnails for me, and um, I would tell it what I wanted it to make me, and it would. And that has changed. Now, if I ask it to depict the government as a dictator or as a fascist, it won't. It would say it's not able to comply. That has changed. I have noticed Facebook, YouTube, TikTok kind of, I'm not saying they hide, but they don't put out my content. I'm not saying my content is good, that it needs to be put out, but sometimes there is no views. How can it be no views? Other people, one view is okay, but to have no views at all, you'll know it's not being put out there. It's being shielded or it's being covered up. I speak up about the government, and I do so. And for those people that know me and know that I constantly um, repost um, videos that I see on TikTok um, to my Facebook page, you know that I've been blowing up my Facebook, and that is because people are getting silent. And we are at the tipping point where we either speak up or forever hold our peace. Our democracy is in crisis. This government is changing where Trump and other officials are taking control of the Justice Department. Um, and the military. All those, once he has control of the Justice Department, it's game over. He will not comply with the laws, and this country is going to be lawless. He will have total control. And I know there is a risk because now he said everybody can have freedom of speech, but it is, we all know it's freedom of speech for those people whom he likes and who would promote MAGA. And people all over are emboldened. So now, with everything going on around us, people are being quiet. But how long can we be quiet? How long? Because we don't have time. We are at a tipping point, and if we don't speak up now, we're forever changed. Will you stand up for what's right? Because the moment you do, you might just change the world. Your silence will not protect you. It's just going to get worse.